What's going on, folks, and welcome back to another Scum video. I hope we're all doing well as always. Thank you very much for your ongoing support on the channel. And as we work up to the Christmas holidays, wishing you all safe and well throughout. Much love to everybody. Now, as we know, ladies and gents, this is a game. Scum is a game. It's pretty shocking, isn't it? It's generally smoke and mirrors, and you know, it's pretend at the end of the day. There is a reason for this video, so please bear with me on this one, guys. Now, I would like to go into a little bit about the puppets, and I'm talking about how they actually work, not how I think, and I have my sources with this. So I would like to relay something to everybody about this game. Now, firstly, before we get into anything, I'm going to tell you the very basics. All servers are supported for 64 players. Not anymore. They will work with over 64 players, but you're not going to have the same experience, and here's why. So all servers are catered for 64 players or below. Now, the more players you have, the less puppets you have. The less players you have, the more puppets you have. So you need to have the overhead to be able to cater for more AI, basically. And that's where the performance kicks in. The devs have always stated that this game is catered for 64 players. And that is where it should be. That's not where it necessarily is. I've had servers in the past with 100, 120, and it basically broke the servers because there was no room for PvE, fighting puppets and stuff like this, and the way that they work. So there's a few things that I'd like to go in, and these systems are experimental. They are new to the modern age of game developing as well. This hasn't been done before, and it's not easy in that respect. Playing this game since day one, there has been many changes, and I will ignore the comments that say, well, it's been in early access for 6 years. There's no excuse to this. Well, that hasn't been done before. This hasn't been done before. This game hasn't been done before. Not like this. Not on this level, at least. The map is huge. We have tons of things to do and tons of NPCs and AI. We're going to be getting into the NPCs and stuff, so I hope you're sitting down while you're listening to this, because this might go on for a little while, but I'm going to go into exactly how this works. And like I said, I'm not going to tell you where I'm getting my sources from this, but this is how it is, and I want to forward this on to you guys. So first of all, understanding the building a dynamic spawning system is a very complex task. Any MMO game out there hasn't come close to what Scum has been able to do on its engine, the way that it is happening with the Unreal Engine, so to speak. Assuming from the user's perspective that something should have been done earlier, since, as some have mentioned, it's been a year since changes were made, just shows how little the general public understands the complexity of game development processes. And I know this sounds a little bit out there, guys, but just please bear with me on this one, because this has been a huge issue for a long time. The old spawning system had big limitations, very big limitations, okay? You could spawn a certain number of puppets in front of a player at a distance, and approximately 150 meters, let's say. Then it would reserve those puppets and keep them alive as long as the player stayed within the vicinity, which could extend over 100 meters. This system was fine for a small number of players, but it didn't work well for servers with a higher amount of players, because the more players, the less puppets. The system would reach a cap and stop spawning puppets once all the slots were filled. This meant that either way, very few puppets were assigned per player, or some players would have to wait a long time to be assigned a puppet. The waiting time would depend on how many free players there were. Where were they? And when some of the puppets despawned or got killed, this ultimately made the game far less challenging, leading to countless complaints about the game being boring and empty, which was true. The developers are not denying this. Now, the cap for the max spawned puppet was set to 64. up to a maximum of 500. This meant that if there were 64 players on a server, each player would be assigned one puppet. Up to a maximum of 9. While this doesn't sound bad, in the best case, if you entered Samabor, for example, you would have 9 puppets around you, and then nothing. All along with these open world puppets, there were puppets in bunkers, or important POIs that were limited by that cap. So in many cases, there were far more puppets than acceptable on the server, yet the global feeling of emptiness remained constant, because if a few bunkers were active, they would block all other spawning until the global number fell below the default 64, which would result in an empty world for the other players. Additionally, the impact of hundreds of puppets moving around, along with countless entities, vehicles and players that had to be controlled and synchronized over the network, put significant strain on the server's performance, leading to a conclusion that they simply couldn't have that working on a server. Now, there are a lot of people out there who are very demanding with this, a lot of people who have no idea how game development works, or limitations, or even expectations even work. People just want, without reason or knowledge of how it could be done. So there are a lot of issues with these puppets. I do have a little bit more, so hopefully you guys are still having a seat. I am trying to get through this as quick as possible, but I don't want to rush through it at the same time. Now, because of the empty worlds, many servers set the puppet cap to 500. So, for example, if you just got a server that isn't popular, you're going to put the puppets up, which eventually will make things worse, to the point where the game, this was before, to the point where the game broke and visible issues started occurring. Imagine driving a car and pushing the engine to high RPMs. Most people don't know how cars work, right? They wouldn't know how to assemble one or build an engine, yet they feel entitled to give comments just because they have control over the steering wheel and a gas pedal. Modern cars have RPM limiters, rev limiters, to prevent engine damage. Scum in early access, it's like an experimental vehicle that doesn't have an RPM limiter yet. As we prepare for the version, right? As they prepare for the version for 1.0, they're setting limits to ensure that the majority of players have a better experience. So they don't have the rev limiter yet, guys, because they want to see what they are able to push, as in pushing the envelope, to see where it breaks before they start putting major limiters in. The EA version is open for experimentation, and that's the point. And that's what we have now, ladies and gents. So the new system is intended to make things more controlled and acceptable, from both a design and performance standpoint, for what can run in MMO sandbox games. And yes, there are huge differences between MMO sandbox games, single player and co-op games. The biggest difference is the liberty to do whatever you want. In single player or co-op games, you and your friends head out towards an area to complete specific tasks, missions, usually within a campaign. The game knows where you're heading and what you're doing, so it can adjust the gameplay accordingly. However, in a sandbox survival MMO with many players, there's no way to predict what will happen next. You could head into a town, come within 200-300 meters, activate spawning, and then decide to go somewhere else, or do something different instead of entering the city. The game can't predict that. Yet you might have activated 15 to 20 puppets in that town, which could make it interesting from a gameplay perspective. Now, imagine there are 64 players on the server doing the same thing, which is the worst case scenario. We have to design everything for the worst case scenario. This means that 64 players could spawn and activate 960 to 1,280 puppets across the map. Even though most players won't encounter them because they're far away. That's 20 times more than what's recommended, and twice as many as the maxed out value. Yet, these puppets are not being utilized because all players can choose not to engage with them. From the testing from the developers, they found that a server with 64 players couldn't function properly with more than 200 puppets in the world. That's roughly 3 puppets per player before the game starts to lag. In a single player game, this wouldn't be an issue at all. But even with just 5 players on a server, you could have nearly half of the allowed puppets spawned. So what did the developers do? They decided to create a new encounter system. that controls everything happening to players. This system doesn't just handle puppet spawning, but also manages potential future events like NPCs attacking player bases, environmental hazards, or literally anything else we can imagine. This controller ensures that things happening all over the island are properly distributed, keeping players engaged and making sure there's always something to do. The system also collects data from the world to assess the scope of the encounters. For example, it's not the same if one person enters a POI or if multiple players enter. The system activates events based on the collected data. So when players are turning around and asking, why is this taking months and months? It's because the system they're building is very complex. And additionally, the whole horde system, the name from the first type of encounter system could spawn hordes, not because it can only spawn hordes, was developed by just one person, based on a design. From the team of 50 developers, only 2 people were involved. Why? Because other developers were busy with other essential tasks for the game. Now, most games are smoke and mirrors. There's so much that people don't understand about how games are made. The distractions that we have are the things that we want to do. It's smoke and mirrors. That's all it is. But the way that has to happen in a very specific way, as a call and supply effect, shall we say, when we engage and activate an encounter. They create the illusion of reality until they don't. When you start questioning what's really going on, you'll expose things as illogical or unreal, breaking the immersion. There's a lot of people out there who don't understand how the puppets work or how the horde systems are working. Now, the encounter system is fairly new, and the devs are working tirelessly to get this correct for us, to keep the optimization and the performance of every server running as well at the same time. This is why, for players like myself, I do prefer PvE. I can still do PvP like everyone else can. I just prefer personally doing other things in the game. I like to kill the puppets, and I love how they work right now. Yes, they need tweaking, but there's a lot. There's a lot that needs tweaking as well. At the same time, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. What they've achieved with the new spawning system is the ability to guarantee that even with default settings and 50 plus players on the server, all players will have a certain number of puppets assigned, and they will be all randomized threat within the boundaries of what current hardware can handle. Again, the system is very complex and has had to be released live in production to see where the holes are. As in, ladies and gents, us. We are the testers. That's the point of early access. Now, regardless if anyone complains about anything and how bad potentially a game is, this is an early access game. And people have to remember that, including myself. The game is very far from perfect, ladies and gents. And I will be the first one to put my hand up and say that the game is very far from perfect. There's a lot of things that need adjusting, and there's a lot of patches and updates coming into this game, making it 10 times better than what it is now. So there's going to be a lot coming here. The system is very complex, and it had to be released live in a production to see where the holes are, like I just said. Most of the holes have now been filled, according to the devs, and it is getting better. We will continue to fine-tune it, they say. Especially when armed NPCs arrive, expect more complaints when players get killed by low-ranked NPCs with bows. But of course, guys, don't forget, you can't suck in a game. It must be the game's fault. Remember, it's not always us, you know? Sometimes it's the game, and guess what? Sometimes it's vice versa, you know? Sometimes we can suck, and it is our fault. Not everything is always a bug, or, you know, is always a game's fault in that respect. So, ladies and gents, I just kind of wanted to give you a little example of how, you know, everything is kind of working with Scum right now in terms of the puppets, and how the puppets are really working around players, and even the server settings and stuff like that too. So I thought this would be a little bit more of an insight. I'm sorry this has gone on for about 15 minutes from what I can see on the clock there, but I had to push this forward and really just sort of wanted to give everyone a little bit of an understanding. Like I was saying, the big word here, kind of the most memorable word here is smoke and mirrors, or words, shall I say. That is kind of how this game works. It gives you an illusion there's more puppets than what there is, because you have some within a vicinity spread around via a certain parameter, like 150 meters, like I mentioned earlier on. And, you know, these need to be fine-tuned. How long these puppets stay for? If you run out of the area, how long do the puppets stay for there? Because let's say, like I mentioned earlier on, we was running into a town, we set off, 20 puppets, and then we decide to run out of town. Well, those puppets don't need to be there. They can be assigned to other players. And this is one of the big things. Like I said, the more players you have on a server, the less puppets you're going to have. And if those puppets are pushed, there are going to be limitations. Because you might have 500, you might have 100 players with 500 puppets. It's not going to happen. It's physically not going to happen. Because eventually what's going to happen is, when the devs do put as we said earlier on, as an example, when they put the limiters in, then things are going to change with the game a little bit more as well. Personally, for me, I love the puppets. I think they're great. New NPCs are going to be awesome. Going to welcome them with open arms, wild hunters, and everything else as well. Now, this video might be very confusing for you guys. It might be very confusing for you, but I just wanted to put this out there with everything about the puppets as well. And this goes for all areas, bunkers, towns, and everything else as well. Because there's actually less puppets in the bunkers than there are in towns. Towns are a lot bigger. It's a bigger POI. So there we go, ladies and gents. It would be awesome to see what your comments are going to be. Personally, for me, guys, it doesn't matter what anyone says. It's an early access game. If you don't like it, play something else. Or wait until the game is actually developed. And I mean that with the utmost respect, because it is being developed and there are new features that are going into this game that have never been done before, never been programmed by any programmers. And that's why I personally believe Jagex has snapped up Gamepires, because Jagex are one of the biggest gaming companies in the world. Regardless of what you think of them, they have been a success for over 20 years as one of the biggest online gaming franchises in the world. And they are seeing something with Scum. Personally, I love Jagex and I love Gamepires. To see them working together may not breed the perfect game. It might be a complete fucking mess at the end of it. Who knows? I can't predict the future. If I did, I'd be a millionaire. Same as you guys. But I don't know. I'm hoping for the best. Right now, I'm enjoying the game. I think it's fantastic. And I think, yes, there are bugs that make it very annoying, but we have a lot of patches and a lot of stuff happening between now and 1.0, and then even a couple of years development after that as well. So we've got a long time, ladies and gents. So I do appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much for sitting down and listening to my ramble about this. But I would also like to say a massive thank you to all the supporters on the channel. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe if you haven't done so on the channel. I am full-time here and like to push out a lot of content about Scum, as I just love this game so much. I really do. This is my open world survival game, and please don't forget to hit that like button as well to help push it out, and hit the notification bell. So thanks, and look after yourselves. Take care.